I'm going to talk about brainstorming, which isn't necessarily, focused on social media. But if you guys are marketers, you're doing brainstorming meetings. If you guys are running a business, if you have new products that you're trying to launch, if you have any challenge, how many people have been in a brainstorm meeting in this room? Okay, the ones that aren't raising your hands, we know you're lying. You're just lazy. We know that. How many people have been in a brainstorm meeting that really sucked, that didn't get any good ideas out of it? How many people have been in a brainstorm meeting where the person hosting the brainstorm meeting already knew the idea they wanted and they had the meeting anyways? Right? So there's a lot of problems with brainstorm meetings. The classic thing is, let's take 15 minutes, bang out 12 solutions to this campaign. We'll vote on the right answers. We'll get it done. We'll have an amazing campaign done. Brainstorm meeting. Excellent. That sucks, always. That's never how it works. The other thing, and the worst is when someone makes brainstorm meeting a bullet point within another meeting. Like, let's brainstorm 12 ideas for the new campaign in between these 30 minutes and these 30 minutes, right? That's even worse. That never results into something amazing. So when we talk about brainstorming, we're talking about a creative process. Not just a creative process, but the creative process. Brainstorming, the term has been around since like the 30s, and it's now easily the most popular creative process in the world. Actually, it is a synonym for a creative process. When we talk about creativity, oftentimes we use the word brainstorming in place of the word creativity. So we are talking about brainstorming today, but I'm going to speak more broadly to how to improve creativity within your own projects personally, within your organization, within your company, within your teams. And these guidelines are universal. You can use them if you're writing a book. You can use them if you're writing a blog post. You can use them if you're having an actual brainstorming meeting at your company. And you can also use them to make your company more creative. So keep that in mind as we move forward. A lot of the problems with brainstorming meetings come from our expectations. We expect gold. We expect brilliant ideas every time. And we don't give ourselves permission to spend the time that's really needed to come up with great ideas. Anytime you look at really creative people throughout the world, whether they're artists or musicians or engineers in Silicon Valley or coming up with new company ideas, the common thread typically when you get down to it is persistence and time spent, right? Creativity requires real work. There's no way around that. It requires real effort. And it's not always in the brainstorm meeting. Sometimes it's the prep, sometimes it's the follow-up, sometimes it's actually building an expertise before you get to that brainstorm meeting, actually getting the right people in the room, those sorts of things. So that's what we're going to talk about. The theme for this, though, and I'm going to come back to this several times, is allowing yourself the time, allowing yourself the permission to spend the time to really get to those best ideas at the end of the day. So that 12-minute, bullet point in the middle of the meeting, that's not going to work. Sorry. One of my favorite analogies isn't mine. I stole it from someone, and I can't remember the exact person, but having a brainstorm meeting that's like 15 minutes long is like trying to eat, and doing it maybe once a month as a company is like trying to eat a giant salad once a week and think you're going to be healthy when you eat like 2 cheeseburgers a day, right? If you have a horrible diet and you eat 1 giant salad a week, it's not going to make you healthy. If you are a very stodgy company that doesn't really build in a lot of opportunity for creativity, doesn't build a lot of time to develop ideas, and you have a brainstorming meeting once a month or even once a week, it really isn't going to develop creativity. You have to get deeper into the root of giving people permission to spend time on those ideas. So that's what we're going to touch on. Quick raise of hands. How many of you have been taught how to be creative at some point in your life? Not a trick question. If you genuinely think someone has taught you how to be creative. Very few of you. A little fewer than I expected, but still. So people that did raise their hands, who taught you how to be creative? Just shout it out. Art teacher? My mom. So there's a clear mom block in the audience. What else? Non-moms. Dance teacher. All right. Sounds like a lot of women, which is interesting. Soccer coach. Nice. Interesting. The answers you usually hear are parents, teachers, art school, sometimes your company, like an agency or a company that really does have a lot of creative freedom for its employees. But most people will say they've never been taught to be creative, which is really interesting. How many of you would say that hiring someone that's really creative is an asset to your company? Right? Almost all of you. So it's an asset to our companies, and yet we don't teach anybody how to do it. There's a disconnect there. And we don't give people the time to do it. So most of the people that do teach you to be more creative, the common thread there is they give you permission, all right? And another way to say that is they can sometimes inspire you to be creative. That inspiration, if you are inspired to be creative, all that's doing is someone giving you an example and giving you the confidence to give yourself permission to spend time to be creative. It all comes down to time. It all comes down to saying, I believe I can be more creative. I can believe I can spend more time on this project and come up with a great idea. Sometimes that's inspired by people. Sometimes you just have it inherently because you know you're good at something. But it comes down to that permission level. And that's something at Social Fresh that we're really passionate about, is making sure that we inspire you guys to go out and create great solutions to problems, right? That's why you have all these great speakers, all these great examples up here. So just think about why you may or may not think you've been taught to be creative. Think about the people that do inspire you to be creative, and think about giving yourself permission. Because even if your company's not creative, you have to give yourself permission on your personal projects. If you're writing a book, if you're trying to, strike out in a new direction within your company and they're not creative, you have to give yourself permission on your own time to invest in that in the long term. All right, so again, brainstorming is a creative process. We're going to talk about creative processes, and we're going to start where all creative processes start, which is...
The Pop-Tart, by the way, was a moment in time when they invented, and I think Tom Brokaw tonight is going to be talking about the baby boom, and I am of that era, and when I was about 8, they invented the Pop-Tart, the back of my head blew right off. Right? Do you remember? Like, what? I was in the supermarket aisle with my mother, and I'm like, hold up, hold everything. What the hell is that? Fruit-filled frosted rectangles in a box, the same. The food is in the shape of the box. What is this? And you open the packet. How many were in the packet? 2. Why 2? 1's not enough. 3 is too many. That's why. It was perfect.
But the thing about this joke is, how many people think Jerry Seinfeld is probably, a great comedian, really creative person? Right. Yeah, there you go. Raise your hands. All right. How long do you think it took him to write that joke? A second? A week? Almost a year, somebody said. What else? It took him 2 years to write that joke. These are actually, there we go. These are actually his notes. It's on like a yellow steno pad there. A lot of scratching out, a lot of revising for that specific joke. So if Jerry Seinfeld, who's an amazing, creative talent, amazing comedian, takes 2 years to write this joke, I'm sure he didn't spend the whole 2 years, and that's all he did, right? You got to do brunch with Kramer, you got to count your royalty checks. But it took him coming back to it over the course of a very long time period, and we all think he's very creative. So he spent the time. He puts the time in to get it right. If he's doing that, you have to do the same. I mean, for your problems, for your solutions, you have to have the permission to yourself. You have to give the permission to yourself. You have to have the confidence that if you stick with it, you'll get to a solution. So the secret to being more creative, I can talk about a lot of solutions to creative problems, but the secret comes down to time. So we're going to talk about 3 ways that you can build more time, that you can give yourself permission to solve problems by investing in them with more persistence, with more stubbornness, with more confidence. And I promise you, in your brainstorm meetings, and I'm going to speak specifically to meetings, in your personal projects and in your company and team, it will make you more creative. It will give you better solutions to the problems you're trying to solve. And there's no slides here, so that's not a mistake. All right, so I think one more question before we jump to the first one. How many people have been taught how not to be creative? So the opposite of the question I asked you earlier. How many of you think you've been taught not to be creative? So more hands up, a little hesitation, more hands. You've all been taught how not to be creative. And when I say that, I mean a lot of times when we're younger, we get to color outside the lines, we get to spend time playing with Play-Doh or crayons or eating crayons. We get to do things that are not normal. If we're playing when we're young, it's okay. When we start playing when we get older, when we get into high school. You got to apply to colleges when you get into college. You got to have a career counselor when you get into work. You got a boss. You've got employees. If you're trying to play, if you're trying to spend time experimenting and being creative, it's not looked upon very well. It's looked upon as wasting time sometimes. So you have to think about that transition in your life. I feel very lucky in my life because I've been given permission pretty much in my whole life to be creative. My parents encouraged me to. I had certain teachers. One of my college mentors is here who highly encouraged me to go as an art major in school. When you are an art major in school, you get away with a lot. You can go to school barefoot, it seems, and they're not embarrassed for you, or they don't say it to your face at least. Not that I did that, but I've been given permission, and then I went into work for agencies, and then I started my own company. Most people, 99% of people, are not given that permission. Along the way, their teachers, their employers, their spouses, their employees, their schools encourage them to focus on a defined task, on something they can get really good at, a specialty. And that drains creativity. It's not bad to get a specialty, but you have to do it while remembering to step outside of those lines, because if you don't step outside of that expertise, you'll never get new ideas, right? All right, so that's a little preface. Now, 3 ways to build more time into your brainstorming process, into your creative process. Number 1, we're going to talk about more time by developing more ideas before your brainstorm meeting. We're going to talk about prefacing a meeting with the actual idea generation. So a brainstorm meeting can be very intimidating. You have a lot of egos in the room. Usually the person hosting the meeting has an ego, has an agenda, and not everybody's the most outgoing social person when they're in that type of meeting. So you have a lot of competing social kind of norms there that don't allow for people to be as outgoing and spread as many ideas out there as possible. You want bad ideas. You want absurd ideas. A great idea comes between the bad and the absurd. If you don't get the bad ideas out of your brain, you'll just sit there and think about the easy solutions and the obvious solutions. You have to get them out, you have to write them down, and then you get to the stuff in the middle that's great. Don't be afraid of putting absurd ideas down. When you're in a brainstorm meeting and there's a lot of those kind of social rules playing, the bad ideas don't get said, the absurd ideas don't get said, and people get stuck really easily. So you start by assigning people work before the meeting. I told you this is a lot more work, but I promise you it works. You have everybody that's coming to the meeting develop 50 ideas on their own, even 20 ideas, even 10 ideas. You're automatically, if there's 5 people in the meeting, you're going to have way more ideas to start than you ever would publicly in a meeting when just starting in the middle of it. The key here is to do it anonymously as well. So you have one person in charge. They pull all the ideas together, put them in a spreadsheet. Don't assign this one's from Becky, this one's from Todd. You categorize all of those ideas before the meeting. So you have 50 ideas, let's say minimum. Categorize them all into 5 categories. A lot of them will be alike. Put them together, combine them. And then when you start the meeting, your goal is to review those categories, review those ideas, talk about them, talk about which ones you think are best, talk about which ones you can still combine, vote on them, but do all that anonymously. That way the best ideas rule, and it's not about who came up with the idea. A lot of times 3 people will have the same idea, and they'll all be thinking the whole time, all right, we're doing my idea, great. Right? That's good. I promise you that works. That's how comedy writers work. That's how authors work. That's how a lot of really creative companies work, and it makes the process much better. So the purpose of the meeting then becomes to review, to vote, and to improve those ideas. All right, number 2, more time planning your meeting. This goes to the person that called the meeting. You no longer get to call a meeting and say, all right, let's come up with great ideas. You actually have to work to call a brainstorm meeting. You have to put together, guess what, an agenda. You have to put together a clear goal. You have to put together background information on what the heck you're actually developing ideas on so people have a little more information. You have to put together a follow-up plan. How many people have been in a brainstorm meeting, came up with an idea, and then it never happened, nothing happened after the meeting, right? The follow-up plan needs to be there before the meeting. It'll do wonders, I promise you. And you have to have, and this one's a little tricky sometimes, you have to have a decision maker. One decision maker has to kind of guide the room. It's not always the boss is the best person for that, but you have to have someone that's very knowledgeable about the problem and very knowledgeable about everything in play. And they have to be kind of a little bit self-deprecating, a little easy to work with, and they're going to be the decision makers. Doesn't mean the idea they decide to go in the direction of is going to be where the company goes, but the meeting has to have one decision maker at the end of the day. That's going to help a lot. That planning is really hard work. It's going to reduce the number of brainstorm meetings, and it's going to help you really focus on a clear path to what you're trying to solve in the meeting instead of floundering around in a bunch of different directions. All right, number 3, and we've touched on this a little bit, more ideas. How many ideas do you think you need to start with to come up with a great solution at the end of the day? Just any number. Nothing's wrong. 10, 15. As many as it takes. Good answer. Not the right answer, but good. There's no wrong answer. What I can do is I can tell you what other people do. Really successful, creative people. One great example is SNL. Who watches SNL? Who knows the name of the news program on SNL? Weekend Update, right? Great inspiration for like The Daily Show, been around for a long time. It is the longest running SNL skit. It's been around since the beginning. I think it's probably the only funny part left of SNL, personally, after maybe the opening skit sometimes, you know. But they do about 15 to 20 jokes on Weekend Update. How many jokes do you think they write each week to get to 15 or 20? 100. Anybody else? 200. That's a lot, right? 200? They write 800 or 1,000. Usually 800 is the average. So that's about what these, if you talk to people that write for Late Night with David Letterman, if you talk to people that write for Big Bang Theory, if you talk to comedy writers, it almost comes down to 50 to 100 jokes for everyone that's told. If you talk to people that do a lot of corporate ideation on a high enterprise level that really get paid to be those creatives that are brought in for special projects, they're doing about the same too. They're doing about 50 to 100 ideas for one great idea. So if you do a team and you have everybody come up with 10 ideas and there's at least 5 people, that's 50 ideas. They don't all 50 don't have to be amazing. If you do 100, that's even better. So my general rule is if you're working on a project by yourself, do 50. Come up with 50 ideas. They don't have to be great. If 15 of them are obvious and 15 of them are insane, that's fine. And if you're on a team, go for 100 ideas. If you've got a team together, try to come up with 100 ideas. It's challenging, but if everybody spends an hour on their own time before you get into that meeting, it will help you get to that number, and it will help you get down to really great combinations and great mergers of creativity and inspiration that'll bring you to that great idea at the end of the day. So, just to kind of recap, the very simple and yet very hard secret to creativity is spending more time, is really investing in the process and being persistent. 3 ways to spend more time is to have more ideas at the beginning of the meeting, have a process at the beginning of the meeting, to have a plan. Number 2, to have a plan before you go into the meeting, so you can focus the time inside of that meeting on reviewing and editing and combining. And then number 3, generating a lot more ideas than most of us are pretty comfortable with right now. A lot more ideas. And trying to find that space between the obvious and the absurd. And then the final thought I'll leave you with is that ideas happen when expertise brushes up against life experience. If you want to build a more creative company, if you want to build a more creative, if you want yourself to be more creative, you have to go out and experience things. That's what Social Fresh is about. You're coming out and you're brushing up against all these, well, you don't have to physically brush up against each other, right? But you're brushing up against all these amazing ideas, all these insights from speakers, a lot of you are amazing in this industry and doing wonderful things. The conversations in the hallways are just as good as the conversations that happen up here on stage. You have to read books. You have to read magazines. You have to step out of your comfort zone. People that travel abroad are typically more creative. People that speak second languages are more creative. People that live in cities are more creative because they're brushing up against new ideas all the time, right? You combine those new experiences with an expertise, and that's how you find new solutions to problems that you're really good at already. So you all have an expertise. Go out and brush up against life and categories that aren't your day-to-day job. And that's where inspiration really comes from. Thank you for your time.